Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of our podcast. I'm Malena Gonzalez, the current president of the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning. With over 15 years of experience in adult learning, problem-based learning, and design thinking, I have had the privilege of working closely with the society and professionals to help reshape training and education. Today, I'm especially excited because we're diving into a topic that is incredibly important for today's law enforcement landscape: mental health in policing. And to explore this critical subject, I'm honored to be joined by Gerard Cleveland. At the end, Jerry will provide 10 suggestions to implement within your agency, so stay tuned and listen. Jerry has an impressive and very background as a former police officer with experience in foot patrol and drug squad work. He dealt with homeless populations and individuals experiencing drug-induced mental health issues on a daily basis. Beyond his law enforcement career, Jerry has served as a teacher, guidance counselor, and a school principal, where he worked directly with students and families to address mental illness, suicidal behaviors, and mood disorders. He's also a lawyer and university professor with over 15 years of experience lecturing law students on the integration of mental health understanding into their careers. As the co-chair of the PTO and PBL training for first responders and co-author of Tier Teaching, Surf Pursue, and You in Blue, Jerry has been pivotal in helping first responders address mental health issues in their daily call responses. Originally from Canada, he now resides in Australia, but continues to work and lecture internationally. We're thrilled to have him with us today to talk about the role of mental health in policing and how we can better train our officers to respond to these critical situations. So without further ado, let's dive in and welcome, Jerry. How are you?
I'm very well, Malena. Thanks for having me, and good morning to you. And it's late at night here for me, so I'm happy to be speaking to you. The wonders of technology.
Perfect. Well, let's get into this so we don't make wait our listeners, right? Or let them wait. So, first question that I have here for you. Can you provide a general overview of mental illness for police trainers and academy staff to use when training?
I can. Most definitions of mental illness are found in particular legislation across the world, and they use phrases such as a loss of thought or mood or perception or belief or volition, memory, those sorts of things that's coupled with a impairment to the person's judgment or behavior. So it has to be that duality. It has to be the loss of the memory or the perception or the volition, and then it has to also be an impairment of the person's judgment or that person's behavior, because lots of people have mental illnesses that are just, they deal with them every day and they're fine. They can maybe take medication for it, but they don't come across the police radar because there's not that secondary capacity that they've lacked, and that's the impairment somehow of their judgment or their behavior. So that's usually where the police will run into people when you get the combination of those two conditions. So that's a general overview of mental health. And it includes all kinds of things. Like, we always just think schizophrenia or depression or bipolar affective disorder or post-traumatic stress, but there's so many more. But that I'm thinking about mental illness as that impairment of thought and perception and belief is a more realistic way to look at mental illness. And then where it comes into this police sphere, we add that secondary lack of capacity in either behavior or judgment. So that's about as brief as I can make that for officers. And that's the way they should really be teaching it at academies, not mental illness is this one disease, one illness. It's schizophrenia, it's bipolar. That's not the way to go about teaching mental illness. And it doesn't help the police officers when they're out dealing with a myriad of problems, and maybe somebody who has a number of comorbid factors, mental illness plus drug addiction plus homelessness plus poverty. So these are all things that we need to be holistic in our thinking when it comes to mental illness.
Yeah, I guess you make me think about when I teach, we have this thing is learn by doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's how do you make activities for the officers that they're applicable
Right.
and the realistic scenarios. And that's what PBL is all about, right? Problem-based learning, so that you can actually get outside of the clean definition of what schizophrenia is and the ways that you can go around it. But they don't really put you into that stress scenario and how you're going to react towards that person that is reacting in certain ways. And that's how you have the extremes or the incidents that we've been hearing in the news, right? Okay.
Right. I just hate the idea that people are bringing in a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they're well intentioned, but that these academies bring these people in, they present a PowerPoint or even an engaging lecture. That's not how you engage rookie officers or even senior officers, in service officers. You engage them by giving them a problem, giving them the resources to solve that problem themselves, and then having them investigate it in their small group. That's how you deal with mental illness with adults, teaching them how to address it. You have, if you want to be really sophisticated, you include in your classes and your instructions in each of your groups somebody who has a good deal of experience, a mental health nurse or a doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, someone like that, who can sort of set them straight as they're solving their problems. Let me just give you a simple example. If you're going to have a problem with somebody who suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, you notice I said suffers from paranoid schizophrenia. We often make that mistake where we say this guy's a paranoid schizophrenic. Well, that's not who he is. That's just his illness. That's his symptom of his brain condition. So even the language that we teach officers is really, really important. So to get back to my point, if that's in my problem and I go and he thinks that there's people out to try to kill him or something along those lines, and the police show up,
Mhm.
well, they're trained in one sense to start yelling, drop the weapon if it's a knife, or they start yelling and they raise the temperature. Now that may be necessary for some situations, but they should know that when they do that, they're actually making the situation much worse with somebody who suffers from that. So at least they may have come to the same resolution, but they should be talking about how they're addressing each of the different mental illnesses in their training, where it's nice and safe and they can talk through it with somebody who's a professional, as opposed to just going out and doing the same thing, drop the weapon, like they would do with a guy who's robbing a bank who doesn't have a mental illness. So understanding the nuance is critical. And again, I'm not making any declarative statement that they have to act this way. I'm just saying the more knowledge we give our officers in our training, and people say, oh, it takes more time. It doesn't take any more time. You just add it to how they address their calls. You add a mental illness question into every single thing that they do. And it is really effective. I've been doing it at my university for years. So it can be done. And as you said, it's done through problem solving in the classroom. So
Actually,
sorry to go on, but
no, this is great because I get ideas when I'm listening to you. First of all, suffers, and I actually misspoke at the beginning, so that's good. Thank you for also teaching me. Second thing is that you gave me idea. I say, well, as part of my problem-based learning, I do design thinking. That is the same thing. It just has different tips or different areas, but it's exactly the same thing. And one of the things that we do is acting or scenarios, right? So could you put simply in buckets different mental illnesses or sufferings as well. And then some cops, you have a scenario that happens one day. Okay, some cops are going to act like this so that they can actually create empathy towards these individuals. And then other persons are going to come into the room and try to deal with these scenarios. So you have the two versions and then you can flip the roles as well. Anyways, just an idea. Is
no,
I get
that's
excited.
exactly right. I just never use the term scenario because I always use the word problem. Because in terms of problems, there's never the same resolution. In scenarios, you'll often get a desired resolution. But with problem solving, because every single radio call, every single call for service can be 100% different than the one before it in almost exactly the same circumstances. So you have to be prepared to sort of turn on a dime in how you respond. So I like to use the term problem. If people get anything out of the first part of this discussion who work in academies, I'd like them to get that you can't use PowerPoint and lectures to teach people about mental health. You've got to have people in there who can talk things through, resolve it with their students. And even if you're doing it on the range, even if you're doing it in the, while they're driving, even if you're doing it thinking about how will you address this issue that you're doing right now, if the person suffers from, say, this illness. They're not diagnosticians. They're not there to diagnose anything,
Oh.
but they should have enough basic knowledge to understand that different kinds of behaviors require different kinds of responses. And if I can teach it to groups of audiences in a very short time, so can academy instructors who have these students for 12, 15, 16 weeks. So it is very doable in the academy setting, and you're not adding extra time.
It's as simple as understanding the triggers, right? The
Yes.
triggers that this person could have. We were just in a class the other day, and we have a new group of students. And there's a student. Sometimes we whistle to get the attention, or applaud, right, or do things like that. And my colleague whistle, and then there was a girl that approached at the end. I say, I'm gonna ask you not to whistle next time because that triggers me. I have a mental disorder that gives me
Yeah.
anxiety. We didn't know that, but it was really nice that she came forward with that, and then we can avoid those type of scenarios too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Anyways, moving on, because if
Yeah.
not, we can keep talking about these things.
It's such an interesting topic. It's been so much fun and so in sort of intriguing because of the changing dynamic of the research. It's been a wonderful subject to be teaching at the university for the last 16 years to new lawyers, and it is something that is really necessary, valuable. So I was excited to talk about it after all this time, as you are, because we see that the usability of the knowledge every day.
Oh, and you see it in the news, lots of
Exactly.
the need and these lawsuits that are happening because also cops are not getting trained properly, right? So it's both ways
Yeah.
that we're getting into these situations. But anyways, moving on. Now, the second question that I have here for you is so for police officers on the street, what does that loss of thought or perception actually look like to the police officer responding to a call with a mental health issue?
It could be something as simple as somebody whose perception of themselves is that they have a devil in them, or perception is that somebody's out to kill them, somebody's out to harm them, they're an innocent victim. That sort of perception is what I'm talking about. And then the second part of that, where their loss of judgment or their behavior is such that they're acting out in the way that police would get a call to that scene. So that's what you're saying. What does that look like? That's one situation. But if academy instructors and trainers, uh, in-service trainers, are doing their jobs, then I think what you'll see from those people is you'll see they'll take officers through, as you said earlier, through what the triggers could be for people who are acting out in those ways. How do you speak to them? So if somebody's telling you about stuff, do you know what to say to them? So I had so many clients over the years that would be telling me stuff because they'd be in a locked ward telling me things, and I'd be saying, well, that might be your perception, but that's not my perception. And having these kind of phrases that you can use to deal with people, instead of saying that's crazy, or being confrontational in that talk, just knowing how to respond to somebody who is in a delusional state, for example, or somebody who's suffering from post-traumatic stress, or somebody who's seriously depressed. Do police officers right now get trained on particular phrases and things to say, body positions, movements? The answer is generally no, they don't. They get an expert that comes in, does a PowerPoint lecture for them, and it becomes part of a test 6 weeks later. And then when it happens on the street, I know that was the case for me, happens on the street, you're like, oh my God, what do I do here? So it's really important that we practice with them in our training how to respond, things to say, get actors in. If you get the students to do it with each other, if you can't pay for the actors, so that they're used to talking through circumstances with people who suffer from a mental illness, as opposed to just winging it the first time they're out there. And maybe, and I'm not blaming the police on this, maybe we'd see the incidents of violence with people, with their interactions with police, drop down. The police don't get hurt, and the civilians who suffer from a mental illness don't get hurt. So you have to be very particular when you're addressing those loss of perception, thought, volition, all of those things I mentioned in your first question. And that's, I think we can do a lot. The way for, like, every academy should have a DSM-5, a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental illnesses, in every classroom while they're doing this, so that the students can look at things and they can see. Like, that doesn't mean you're not asking them to be psychiatrists, but it's just like you put the criminal code in there when you're talking about crimes. Why wouldn't you have that kind of resource? And a lot of students will just be really interested in this. I know a lot of my law students, they don't have to take my mental health class, but so many of them have taken it over the years because they're interested and they know that it is a live topic that they're going to deal with both internally and externally. So that, like I say, knowing the signs and symptoms of somebody suffering from a particular illness is the best way to train police officers. Particular signs, particular symptoms, and then detailed, specific responses of do's and don'ts. Don't start yelling at somebody if they're paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that? So that sort of thing. And again, I'm not making judgments. I'm just saying, let the officer have as much information as you can get her, and then let her deal with the situation while she's out there on the street. So that's my response. I'm not playing armchair quarterback for anybody.
No, no, it makes absolutely sense. Even I remember the first class that I have with you, and I had to make a presentation, and I used to teach contractors and general construction managers and engineers, etc. So I needed to put some type of power over me, and I put my hands crossed, right? That's something that I normally don't do, but it became a habit and it was instinctual, right? You don't see it. And then that was one of the first comments. You came as like the dictator in the class and you make a barrier. So it's the same idea
Yeah.
of having these police officers coming with armed cross, even that. The attitude that they can main or the energy that they can emit is very different, and it can be perceived by these individuals that they're already like suffering from this mental issue, and they might be very perceptive to these type of actions as well. Okay, well, let's take another look at
Being
another.
mentally ill doesn't. If I could just,
Yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
could just, if I could just finish with that, being mentally ill does not make you stupid. It's not. These are intelligent human beings. They're not stupid. So we have to understand disease that they're suffering from is not all that they are. Why? Wife, they're a mother, they're a kidney ailment, and yet because we vilify mental illness in our society, we do that to the individuals who suffer from mental illness. So getting academy instructors and in-service trainers on board with that kind of attitudinal message to police officers will make a world of difference for agencies.
Mhm. Small changes. It's all in the small insights that you can make a
Yeah.
change. You can make a
Yes.
better service.
Right.
Okay.
Can I mention something about, like, one of the things we're dealing with a lot now, especially I think in the United States, with a lot of returning servicemen and women, is the PTSD. Well, recent studies have shown us, not even that recent, like in the last 20 odd years, that there are structural changes in the size of the hippocampus inside the brain and the shape of it, and both, so that I won't say that supports, or uh, that solidifies that belief that there is an organic part of this as well. We've always thought it was certain mental illnesses that, they see familial patterns and things like that. But when you see a PTS victim who's got a decrease in the size of their hippocampus, and that's the thing that turns off certain kind of behaviors, like where you're always afraid, where you're always on edge, where you're always remembering, where you're not remembering, those kinds of things. That's, you'd think of it as a brain damage, a biological damage to the brain. It makes you understand a little bit more why that behavior is happening. And they're not just misbehaving. This is actually something that's happening with them. When the science is there, think about Tourette's. I read a few circumstances, and I had a case in my career much earlier where there was a young man who had Tourette's, and he got himself into a lot of trouble on the street with police. Tourette's is where you get those outbursts of could be swearing, it could be verbal, it could be a number of different kinds of tics. That can be motor tics. Keep your hands still. If I've got Tourette's and I'm not keeping my hands still, I'm not being disobedient. It might be part of my behavior, those motor tics that I might have. So that's easily explained to intelligent police cadets and in-service police officers. How much of that explaining goes on today in our police training world? Again, I think it's fairly minimal, and it would take nothing to increase it. Even if you have an opportunity for somebody who's from that community to come in and say what it's like for them, and then the officers have seen it, and the first time they see it on the street isn't when it's happening to them and they're responding to a call. So always preparation, always insight through both education and through person to person awareness and problem solving. So
Yeah. Too many things to learn, and it amazes me even as an instructor how also we're not trained to deal with these scenarios. And
right.
we have a student currently that has a mental issue, and but we didn't know about him. They should warn us the first week or before the first week of classes. So he had this outburst in class, as you mentioned. We don't know what kind, and he comes out very blunt, disrespectful, maybe aggressive at some points, right? So we were saying, oh, you have to do this activity, etc. It's like, I told you she was going to say that. And he says so loud and so mean. And I was like, what? And it triggered me, right? Because I didn't expect the behavior. I wasn't warned about it, but I was like, okay, well, if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. It's your education. That's all I said, right? But inside me, I was irked. So I can just imagine the cops, I do have a little bit of a brain within me, but some people they're not trained, and it's a habit that you need to foster, right? To not get triggered also by the way they're speaking to you, and then you escalating easily the situation that it doesn't require to be escalated.
You're right, because the one thing that you have to teach them is that it's not about them. It's not an attack on you. It's an expression of a disease. It's an expression of an illness, a condition. It's not a personal attack on the person that you are standing there in your uniform.
Mhm.
And once we but you can't put that into a PowerPoint. You've actually got to role play that and problem solve it in the academy, in the in-service training. Don't put it into a lecture. You're wasting your time.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where I know I sound like a broken record on that, but people they rely so heavily on these sage on the stage. And sure, the psychiatrist got lots of information, but psychiatrists sit in a room in a controlled situation. That's not the world of policing. It has to be instantaneous. You have to have a bunch of facts ready as soon as you arrive at the scene. So even asking the dispatcher, working with somebody, having somebody on call, having a record of notes for yourself about what to do if you run into a certain circumstance, reviewing those kinds of things for yourself. How do I deal with somebody who has a certain condition? Those are the kind of things that I think officers want, they'll need, and they'll happily learn them if we have enough foresight to teach it to them. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm pushing for, and what the society here is pushing for. We're pushing for broad scope knowledge that police can use to keep themselves and the community safe.
Oh no, I'm like you're preaching to the converted here with me.
I know I am.
But no, I hope that people are really opening their eyes that we do need to change, right? There's something that we're doing wrong and we keep doing it. And
Yeah.
if you know why we keep doing something that it hasn't worked just because we feel comfortable or we have control over the situations or we're checking boxes to make sure that we did this, right? Anyways, now, do you have a list of suggestions for academy directors to consider when building their programs or training recruits and in
Well,
service?
knowing I was going to do this, I sort of sat down and thought, what
Yeah.
are the 5 things I would do internally and 5 things I would do externally? So I'll go slow as I do them, and we could perhaps talk about them because some of the audience might want to write them down. And the first one, we've already addressed it, and it's pretty easy. Number one, most importantly, integrate mental health training throughout your curriculum. Okay, integrate it throughout your curriculum. So integrate it on the range, integrate it in your traffic, integrate it in criminal, integrate it in community relations, integrate it into everything. Your internal, how to behave internally. It should be a part of all curriculum. It's not. It doesn't stand outside. So don't make it a sort of a bump on the body of training. It's not that. It's an integral part of all training. So that's my first one. Integrate it. The second one is, and it's not done well enough. I wrote a book with Greg Seville, the co-chair, and we talked about implementing peer support programs. I will be talking in a little bit about more formalized, but in the peer support, every rookie coming out of the academy should have 3 mentors, should have a 6 months ahead mentor, should have a sergeant or lieutenant or captain or staff sergeant or somebody, inspector further up the rank, who they can look to for career advice. And then they should have another mentor right outside the job, and not a member of their family, somebody they like and trust and respect, but not somebody who who won't tell them the truth. Are we doing that? Are we fostering and facilitating that in police training? And the answer, again, not that I've seen, and I've worked in hundreds of academies around the world. We need to do a better job of creating that peer support. And that's for the internal stuff for the officers themselves. And, ask all those questions. The third one is, I think we need more mandatory screening for mental health. I think doing the odd test, I know we have different tests. The screening that I'm talking about isn't to eliminate people who have a mental illness, because a good number of us, it's as high as 1 in 4 of us, suffer from mental illness of some kind, depression, anxiety, whatever. It shouldn't exclude you. But if you're in a job and you've got PTSD, and that job is likely to trigger more PSD for you, it's good to know about what you might do to remediate, what you might do to avoid. Maybe it's not the job you should be going into. I don't know, but we should be really careful about how we're screening. And I know there's all kinds of civil legislation that deals with who we can hire, who we can't hire. And that's not what I'm suggesting here. I'm suggesting that we have a screening and we talk to people when they're coming in and saying, here's some of the things that you're going to run into. What experience do you bring to this? I'm not, as a lawyer, I don't want to get into the HR workplace. What are you disclosing and all that? I'm just saying, if you've decided to hire this person, then do you know what their ACE score is? Their adverse childhood experience score. Because if they don't, they should, even for their own self-care. And certainly, as a police officer, every police agency should have ACE testing. It's the most remarkable thing that's happened to us in terms of our understanding of how long we're going to live, for one, how we're going to respond, how we're going to behave. So that adverse childhood experience testing is critical for agencies and for instructors around the world to do. The next one is pretty well done, I would say, and that's access to counseling and therapy service. It's well done in that it's offered. It's not well done in that they don't take it up. They don't go to it because there's still a stigma around mental illness. And so I think the access to counseling and therapy service has to be looked at from maybe a union perspective and say, maybe we do it as a proactive sort of thing, where we start bringing people in and saying, hey, here's 10 things you can do to focus on this year. And then you bring in your mental health experts and you do 10 more. So the access to counseling isn't when you're feeling suicidal. That's too late. The access to counseling and therapy services should be well before that, and it should be very much a proactive event. So that's my fourth one. The last one is hard, but I think police agencies, at least police agencies that are thinking about retaining people, because that's a big issue right now, is the holding on to people, is that we have to promote better work-life balance. I know it's in the law industry that is just smashing us, but I know it's the same for police around the world. So work life doesn't mean what I think a lot of people mean. I think the work life is that you need to be able to um, express, who you are, both at work and at home. And I think understanding that people are struggling and maybe dealing with some things that they've seen or done, that's important that we facilitate that at work. And that of course goes back to my fourth category, the accessing counseling and therapy services. But the promoting the balance isn't about going out for a run every day or doing that kind of thing. The balance is that you accept that your workplace is influencing your home life extensively. To have training for that, are there courses for wives and husbands of police officers to help them understand? Are there courses for children to go and do? So that work-life balance for me isn't the same as what I think it means for a lot of people. And I think a work-life balance really does have to be specifically designed for police, because you're never out of that uniform, even when you're at home, even when you're walking the street, even when you're going into stores. So understanding how to carry yourself in both worlds and have your family involved in both of your worlds is the work-life balance to which I refer right now. So that's my 5 internal ones. The external ones, I think, are more for your senior officers and more on a city manager or like a deputy administrator, a chief executive officer level. And I think every agency should have a specialized, what they call in many jurisdictions, a CIT team. So the crisis intervention training. Somebody who is either a healthcare professional or a police officer who is trained specifically to deal, as I've been speaking with you today about, has all this training, uh, and train officers for those times when you're going to need them to have those. Now, that's tough because budgets are a real problem right now. So you're going to need a fair amount of training, but it doesn't take forever if you put 15 or 20 of your people through a course and then you have them send it out and you have people do this and you make it part of their promotion process so that they can understand how people are addressing calls for service on the street. Because if we talk about money, if you get yourself into financial trouble because maybe somebody got shot because of a situation that went bad, or somebody didn't address a mental illness properly, or whatever the reason for the lawsuits are, you'll save a whole lot more money by doing it right in the first instance. So there's always a fine balance that I think chiefs and senior executives have to find when they're paying for training. But it doesn't have to be super. You're going to have a lot of officers who are interested in this, so it doesn't have to be super expensive, and it can certainly be addressed at a divisional level, which is where you really do want to address all of these things. Because if you got it at the headquarters level, it's the middle of the night, you're just not going to see those CIT people out on the call. So you want somebody on every shift, and make that one of your promotional guidelines, if you will, or make it something that people strive to do. And I think you'd get quite an uptake because there is a real interest in mental health, especially among our younger officers. So that's that one. The next one is kind of in keeping with that. Number 7 is that you should be collaborating with mental health professionals. As a chief, as a city manager, as a director of your university there, as whomever, like everybody who's running the show should be collaborating with local mental health professionals. Get into some meetings with those folks. Say, how do we get out of our silo? How do I not just be dealing with police while you deal with mental health, since we have all this crossover? I think police need to be better at integrating, because they just get stuck with doing everything, and they need to be able to integrate other services into their response. Some of it will be those CIT teams, and the people with the mental health professionals might be the ones who come and train. They might do ride-alongs. They may individually train officers. I think you'd find many psychologists and people like that who would be interested in reaching out like that. certainly lots of social workers who would. So that integration and collaboration with police, we talk a great story in policing. Unfortunately, we're so busy running call to call to call that we don't actually do it. And if we did it, we might actually save ourselves a few of those calls. The next one, again, we're doing it when we started introduced bean bags and the guns and tasers and stuff, but non-lethal responses for mental health crisis. And I think we could do more. I think the non-lethal response isn't just the weaponry. The non-lethal response is some of these other things, collaborating with the mental health professionals, finding out the best phraseology to use when you're dealing with particular, you know, problems in the community. Is it somebody with PTS? Is there a trigger? Do you understand what the trigger is? What have you done? What's your research? What's happened there? So those non-lethal responses aren't just about weaponry. They're also about education and training, and it starts right at the academy. But the most obvious ones are the weaponry, but that's where we stop in policing because we know weapons. So to a man or a woman with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I want to not have that. I want them to think more broadly on that. So that's that one. And nine, every police service should be doing, I think, a public awareness campaign on mental health and talking to the community about the issues that the police officers are facing day to day. Because I don't think many people are aware of how difficult the job is for police officers and how hard it is to deal with somebody. And then you got to go sit with them for 6 hours in the emergency ward because or at the mental health ward. So people don't understand that. And they have to understand what it is the police are doing. So an outreach there. Maybe there's a team of volunteers that would join the police service who get some training and they would be able to join in and sit and stay with people, or you would have people who are security at the hospital. Are you reaching out and collaborating with them, as I had spoken of with my previous one? But you'll never understand who can help you if you don't have a public awareness campaign. So that ninth thing is critical. Make people in the community, especially the mental health professional community, aware of what your challenges are. All of a sudden, you might find people in there's community groups that are parents of persons diagnosed with a mental illness, and they're always looking to help out. Many of them have lost their children in terrible circumstances, and they want to reach out and help so other people, adult children often, but so that they don't lose more children. And you'll see these volunteers coming out. Have you done a public awareness campaign to get those people on side with you? Again, I think we could do more. And finally, one that nobody likes because it's boring, but the world revolves around this. You need some data accountability. You need to have continuous improvement. And the only way you can have continuous improvement is what's your data gathering? Who does it? So there are people out there that can tell you exactly what to gather, what information to gather. If you're looking for budgets, if you're going to the health department to look for support and say, hey, we're dealing with X amount of your responsibility here. You've got that much data that you can provide to them. So how much data has been offered has been collected so that you can offer it to other services? And they're my 10 suggestions. And I think with those sorts of initiatives, you'd see a real improvement in how your police service, how your social service, how your university, whatever, deals with their clients.
Oh, these
So
are.
that's one.
I was thinking about it actually. I've been having a person from the department at the college that I teach that they 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 bring new instructors in and they try to teach them good techniques, etc. Blah blah blah. So they had a new manager. Actually, I know her from we worked in the past together, and one of the people that works with her, he's coming to my classes. I have an open door policy. So I say, if you want to see what we're doing, just come over, sit down and be part of the team, right? He's doing some of the activities that we've been doing, and a lot of them are for problem-based learning. So he's thinking about how he can implement more problem solving into the whole curriculum for instructors, right? Finally, after how many years that you guys came over to train us, right? So that's kind of nice to see at least some movement in that part. But one of the things that I asked the students to storyboard the day of the life of the user, for example, and he did the day of the life of the instructor. right? When a brand new instructor, and when he did it, we started throwing ideas together, and it was that moment that I say, what about mentorship for our instructors? You have
Yeah.
great instructors that we've been here for a while. We're doing good techniques in teaching, no PowerPoints, right? So I'm very sure some of us were willing to have these instructors come over and see us or coaching them, etc. So that's something that you mentioned. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
these we implement them in our things. And I was thinking throughout your 10 tips, it's like data. Like if you just have the data and you mention it at the end, every year you can see, okay, we have X amount of these type of cases. How are we going to prepare our police officers better next year to bring down
Right.
those numbers, right? It's
Right.
just the data. And we have so much data right now with our cell phones, with the system that they do to logging calls, that I'm very sure that you just need to hire somebody to bring in that data and visualize it in one way, right?
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
so many, maybe that's something that I believe maybe a police academy or managers, they get overwhelmed with how many changes they need to do. And one of the things that I mentioned to other instructors and even to my bosses when I bring out all these things, say we don't need to do them all, and that's me as well. I don't need to make all the changes right away. The same thing that you told me with PBL. You know, you don't need to make the changes right away. You start implement them little by little every year.
Yep.
So I do have to say, after 15 years of doing this methodology, I feel confident on how my material is turning out now, because I have learned so many things. I have shaped the material to be the adequate for the ones. And every year, that's one of the things that my boss told me. I like that you right away see the problems at the end of the year, you write them down, and you make the changes for next year and see how it goes. And if it didn't work, well, you learn from your mistakes, fail in order to succeed. Uh,
Yeah.
we're failing right now training police officers. So what do
Yeah.
we have to lose?
Yeah. In terms of addressing mental health issues, especially mental health and crisis issues, I would agree with your comment that there's a good deal of failure, some successes, lots of successes actually, but even 10 deaths or 100 deaths or whatever, it's so mind-boggling that we can stop this, and that's not even the legal suits that happen, the lawsuits. It's not even the tragedy of families that have been hurt, and police officers families as well, and the citizens. It's something that we can do better, and all we have to do is make a commitment. And I think those ten kind of things will allow people to do that. And speaking of training, they've got to learn to do it in a problem solving way. And we're going to be putting something up on the website where there's even more training coming for anybody who wants to send um, some of their academy people to learn how to do all this stuff, because we always have people who work on the mental health issues in the PBL class. Now I always make sure that's one of the categories. So if anybody is interested, maybe you'll be putting something up on the website for them to, yeah, address and put
Absolutely.
something in here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope that everybody, at least they learn. I always tell my students, at least if you learn one thing, it's good. At least one thing is
Mhm.
really good that you can apply, right? And then you
Right.
can re-listen and learn another thing, right? But yeah, we're gonna have a July 7 and 18 of 2025. So you still have lots of time to prep, to ask for permission, a budget approval, etc.
Yeah,
Is
it's a 2-week course from the 7th to the 18th of July, and it's in South Dakota. And Malena will put everything up on the website for
I
everyone.
think
So thanks, everyone.
yeah, I think I might even join you guys. So
You're
it's
you're you're very welcome.
closer
Yeah.
to where I live. But thank you so much. Please send your questions at info@pspbl.com. If you have, or check out our website, the training material is going to be there, and the link to subscribe or to enroll into the program. I hope you enjoy this and have an excellent day.
Bye. Thanks, Malena.
Bye.